Well, good morning, everyone, or whatever time of day it is, wherever you happen to be. I know that for some of you, it's a heroic time of night. So welcome to our roundtable session on adventures in awarding social outcomes contracts. I'm Anne Davis, I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Go Lab, and it's my great pleasure to chair this session. We've got a fantastic panel for you. And they're going to be focusing on some of the issues that organizations can face when they're awarding outcomes-based contracts. A lot of organizational processes were designed at a point in time when outcomes-based contracts were not the focus. And so our speakers have all got experience, either practical or academic or both, in tackling some of those challenges and trying to either work around them or get them changed. And I hope that this session will produce some really helpful lessons for other people involved in those similar challenges. So it's a great opportunity to learn from a really experienced panel. I could spend quite a lot of the session telling you about who they all are and their wonderful achievements. And instead, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves as they come up to speak, because then they can tell you the most pertinent things about their experience for this session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first pair of speakers, Hilary, who's online, and Milena, who is sitting next to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is
it's on. Thank you very much, and very, very pleased to be the first speaker in a panel with such a great name, Adventures in Awarding Social Outcomes Contracts. So I'm Milena Castelnou. I'm a principal at the Education Outcomes Fund, and I've been working in the field of results-based financing as a practitioner for quite a few years now. I was previously an associate partner at Instiglio. I come to this with a bit of a different angle from most people on this panel, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a procurement expert. I'm a practitioner, so my experience has been much more on the technical design of results-based financing programs. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how I got interested in this topic. So I came across the questions of procurement and legal questions as I was working on the design of programs. The first one was when I was working on the design of the first social impact bond in Colombia in workforce development. And it was at the time, I think that record has been beat since then, but it was at the time the shortest CIB ever designed. But it could have been even shorter if we hadn't kind of met some legal challenges when it came to it. And I think what we did, and what a lot of teams do, is that we tackled first all of the technical issues. We decided on the outcomes, how we're going to measure them, how we're going to price them, and then only we said, okay, now let's draft a contract. And at that stage, it then led to quite a few months of delays, which made me realize that actually this kind of process is really something that's often underestimated. I then worked on a large-scale RDF program in Morocco, where I worked with Hilary. And at that point, we had to think about how are we going to select implementers for a results-based financing program? What type of approaches do we need to follow? What type of template are we going to use? And again, I was faced with these questions. And now more recently at the Education Outcomes Fund, working with the World Bank and the government of Ghana on the launch of an outcomes fund, a really large-scale outcomes fund. We've been, again, facing these questions of legal and procurement, and we have to use the World Bank templates, which are not exactly fit for purpose for results-based financing programs. So we've had to use non-consulting services or consulting services templates, and had to work with Daniela on how to make adjustments to make them work for our program. And this had led to really significant delays. So all of this to say that for me, it came as a realization in practice that these are issues that really matter and that in fact, we probably don't speak about enough. And so I've been working at the Education Outcomes Fund on setting up our own template to address these challenges, but also wanted to share these insights with others so that we're not always kind of reinventing the wheel. So I've been working with Daniela and Hilary on this panel, and we co-authored a paper called Setting Up for Success, which you can find on the OF website, I think on the GoLab website as well, where you can find some practical recommendations for others embarking on these adventures, which hopefully will make it easier. And I'll share very briefly the kind of three main points, and then Hilary will give you a bit more details around the content. The first thing I want to say is, and I've already implied it, but it's about the fact that you should never really underestimate these challenges. And so it's really important to anticipate and really start working with procurement and legal teams early on. The second thing is that you need to have a different approach when you're designing results-based financing program. The procurement and legal processes need to be slightly different, or actually quite different, from what they are for typical grants and fee-for-service contracts. And finally, just to finish briefly with a message of hope, is to say that this is challenging, but it doesn't have to be. And in fact, others are going to be speaking about standard templates and how these can help and facilitate the process. And also, as teams become much more familiar with these type of mechanisms, actually over time, it will become much faster, which should also help decrease transaction costs and make it much easier to adopt results-based financing mechanisms. So I'll hand over to Hilary, who can tell you a little bit more about how are these different from normal grants and contracts.
Thank you, Milena, and thanks everyone for having me on the panel. I'm very excited to be here this morning, despite the early hour. So thanks very much for having me. I am a senior director in the procurement practice group at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And in my role, I advise on different procurement and grant modalities. I've been working a lot on results-based financing programs. As Milena mentioned, we worked together on the Morocco RBF employability program, which was a $10 million program to improve employment outcomes in Morocco. And we did face quite a few challenges with trying to adapt MCC's procurement practices. So it is challenging, and I now also am working on a working group within MCC to try and figure out how we can use our procurement and modalities to better support RBF. We're also working on a program in Lesotho currently that is also facing some challenges in implementation. So just all this to say that I do have direct technical experience in trying to adapt more standard procurement templates for RBF. And I will speak a bit now, make 3 points, echoing some of what Milena said, but just to add on, I would say that from the procurement side, I've learned it's really important to engage procurement early on. If it's an afterthought, it can lead to a lot of delays. Sometimes program people might not be thinking of how to structure the contract or structure the procurement up front, but I would say that it's really critical and shouldn't be left as an afterthought, because it's key to the success of a program. And there are some important considerations for an RBF program. Using performance-based criteria rather than strictly compliance criteria is important, and how you assess organizations is different. Organizational capacity is important, past performance, and then in the case of RBF, their capacity to manage financial risk is also very important and should be taken into account in the evaluation process. And that is a lesson learned from doing procurements for RBF. Another point, the second point I would like to make is that the assessing the cost and the cost effectiveness is quite different in an RBF. Traditionally, many procurement programs might go for a lowest price or very straightforward calculation on price, but what matters in an RBF program is the price per outcome, and procurement people need to be knowledgeable and aware of how to assess that. It's different from how you would do it a traditional financial evaluation, and you may have to pay more sometimes for a quality program, and that needs to be taken into account, that in the evaluation the quality can be more important or weighed more importantly than a price. And it's also very important to have some kind of flexibility in RBF and to be able to deviate a bit within the scope when needed, and to deviate from a budget line item, where in a traditional budget you might not be able, it might be more rigid. RBF requires more flexibility. And the final point I'll make from the paper and lessons learned is that for the contracting, contracts for RBF are different in a traditional activities-based contract where you're paid for your work. The contractor does the activity, they're paid for a deliverable. In an RBF program, it's focused on outcomes and results and not just activities and inputs, which is a mental shift that technical experts need to make, and contracting and legal procurement all need to be involved in setting up this kind of contract. There's also more risk involved. The implementer may not be paid. If they don't achieve the result, they might not be paid. They have to be willing to take on this risk. And so these contracts also benefit from these getting good suppliers, good contractors, good implementers that can bear this risk. As I mentioned, the need for good financial capacity. And the other point is that there needs to be some flexibility in the contracts, which in some traditional contracting procurement, there's not much flexibility to deviate once you've signed the contract. However, in an RBF program, things change. Implementers need to try different approaches, and so there needs to be that flexibility there to have changes and amend if necessary within the scope of what's allowable, of course, within the contracting rules. But it is something to keep in mind when setting up contracts for outcomes.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much indeed for those interesting thoughts, and also for keeping beautifully to time and setting a great example to everyone else. Well done. So I'm going to hand straight over to Karishma and Miranda, who are going to be talking about some of their experiences in outcomes-based contracting. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. And firstly, just thank you so much to the Government Outcomes Lab for the opportunity to speak at this year's conference. My name is Karishma Sringarpure, and I'm here with my colleague Miranda Lee, and we both work for the Office of Social Impact Investment at New South Wales Treasury in Australia. So like Milena, our work cuts across the life cycle from design, procurement, ongoing management. So I do hope we can provide our perspective on some of the adventures in awarding social outcome contracts. But before I begin, if we could just jump to the next slide. I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm presenting from today, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and then just pass over to you, Miranda.
Thanks, Karishma, and hi, everyone. I'm also meeting you from Gadigal land, not too far from where Karishma is in Sydney. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Next slide, please, Ian. Thanks. Firstly, to provide some context, the Office of Social Impact Investment, or OSSI, partners with government agencies, the for-purpose and for-profit sectors to create long-term social impact. OSSI works to foster a broader and more diverse impact investing ecosystem by piloting innovative and invest to save approaches to funding social outcomes and building cross-sector capacity. OSSI has developed 9 investments to the market, with 1 currently in development. Australia's impact investment market is relatively young compared to the UK. However, since the first Australian Social Impact Bond, or SIB, was developed in 2013 in New South Wales, momentum has been building, with many other states issuing SIBs and entering payment by result contracts. So a few characteristics of Australia's social impact investment market to note are a tendency for larger contracts in the range of 10 to 30 million with a long tenor, a proportion of fixed advance payments alongside payments that are contingent on outcomes achieved, and a strong reliance on government funding with smaller philanthropic participation. OSSI views outcome-based contracts as one tool in the social impact investment kit to test new and innovative models to address social challenges. And as all innovation inherently contains an element of risk, so do SIIs. And by risk, we're referring to factors that could result in a program facing challenges or not achieving the intended outcomes. So today we'd like to introduce a risk framework Aussie is developing to help identify, evaluate, and manage these risks in social impact investments and simplify the process for all partners. So looking at social outcome contracting as an adventure, we hope the risk framework can provide a compass when exploring some uncharted territory. It provides an approach which embeds and codifies key learnings to ensure they're considered throughout the outcome-based contract lifecycle. Back to you, Krishma.
Thanks, Miranda. And just if we could go to the next slide. So similar to Milena and Hilary, what we're trying to do is, I guess, really simplify the approach for all stakeholders involved in these type of contracts. So our framework is based on Aussie's experience to date, as well as academic papers in the area. Our aim for the framework is to help guide decision-making when developing and managing impact investments. We feel it will really help us streamline the process to negotiate impact investments, whether that's a social impact bond where investors are involved or a payment by result contract. So from initial program co-development, but also contract and payment metric design, all the way into the actual contract design and to successful implementation. So on the slide here, you'll see 16 risks that we've identified across 3 key areas, that being program risk, measurement risk, and what we've classified as other or third-party risk. So while these risks, I don't think would be new in any sense and hopefully resonate with you, we're hoping that this framework will bring them to the forefront of discussions that we have with all stakeholders from the beginning of the process. And as Miranda said, make sure that they're considered through the development and ongoing management of impact investments, and hopefully make some of that procurement and contracting decisions simpler as well. A learning for us, though, to get it into, I guess, a simple format, is that these risks really do interact with each other. It makes the task of identifying and mitigating them even more complex, and this is definitely our experience as well. Without going into too much detail on this slide, I'll just point out a couple of the key risks, that being intervention, model risk, operational, referral, and various different measurement risks. I think these slides will be circulated later, so please do have a read in your time. And if I could just go to the next slide. So I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper here. In identifying these 16 risks, we wanted to understand what really drove these risks higher in these outcome-based contracts or social impact investments. So under what circumstances and scenarios did we see risks more likely to occur or more disruptive if they actually did occur? So for each risk area, we've tried to describe the drivers of the risk once a social impact investment is actually launched. So this just gives you some examples of kind of the backing work that we've put into the framework. So on this slide, we've given 3 risks that we see often arise to demonstrate our thinking. So for example, we know intervention risk, which we've defined here as that the chosen intervention model doesn't produce the expected results for a target cohort, is more likely to occur if there's little or no evidence of the intervention or program's effectiveness previously, or even if the program hasn't operated in the exact same jurisdiction or at the same scale before, or if they've targeted a specific cohort previously. So for example, some of Aussie's health impact investments were previously offered to a slightly different cohort or in a different state before they operated as a social impact investment. Just touching on referral risk here, this is the risk where there's less referrals than we expected in initial modelling, and the intervention groups are probably smaller than first thought, or that the cohort actually referred is more complex than the program was actually designed to support. And we've seen that this tends to be higher when the cohort is quite difficult or challenging to define, or the referral pathways in itself are quite unclear, and the provider doesn't have those existing relationships with referral partners. And our experience here tells us that in these situations, it takes a bit of a longer ramp up period for the provider and the program to really find its feet and build those trusted relationships. And just lastly, touching on measurement risks. As you know, there's a lot of risks that fall into this measurement bucket, but we define this as the risk that program performance is not accurately or timely measured due to either data quality, availability, service providers' capability or capacity, the quality of the baseline, of course, as well as the difficulty in actually verifying outcomes. So here we've seen risk higher when the outcomes can't be measured directly, so potentially proxies are used. There's low quality data sources. The baseline may change over time. And one particular one is the difficulty in actually evidencing outcomes. And we've seen this in our employment-focused impact investments where evidencing outcomes is reliant on data provided by clients or third parties like employers. I'll just take a sip of water, sorry. So hopefully that gives like a broad overview of the framework. But in addition to the drivers of risk, what we've tried to do is actually develop a standardized risk scoring methodology to apply it across our investments. So we've looked back at our current portfolio, but also really looking to embed and apply this to new investments. So just going to the next slide, and that. So hopefully that's given a bit of an overview of what OSCE does, but also some of the work and current thinking we're doing around risk, and really look forward to discussing further with our fellow panel members and answering any questions from the audience. So thank you. Back to you, Anne.
Thank you very much indeed for some great insights there, which look very recognisable, and lots of things to talk about on those slides too. So thank you. We're going to move on now to a World Bank perspective from Inga, who I can't see, but I hope is there. Yes, there. Over to you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this panel. So I'm with the World Bank, a senior infrastructure specialist, and for the last 7 years or so, I worked on results-based financing projects at the World Bank, and I managed projects across infrastructure and social sectors. And I'm currently leading the work on outcome-based financing at my institution, where about 2 years ago, we launched an outcomes fund, a multi-donor trust fund. And as part of that, under its aegis, we are developing and designing several outcome-based contracts, including impact bonds. Overall, my team has launched 50 or so results-based financing schemes, but mostly of these have been output-based aid projects. So our experience with outcome-based contracts is primarily through impact bonds and is relatively recent. And here I'd like to draw on some of the lessons that we've learned, some of the challenges that we've encountered with the impact bond contracts. So we have only a handful of impact bond projects at the World Bank, and all are in a different stage of implementation. And in all of these projects, the World Bank is providing the government with a full or part of the outcomes fund that would be paid out based on the achievement of results. And in speaking about our experience with contract awarding, I will use the examples of the Ghana EOF, or Education Outcomes Fund, the Uzbekistan Impact Bond for Early Childhood Education, and the Palestinian Development Impact Bond for Jobs. So what can we say about the outcome-based contracts based on these projects? So the first point I'd like to make is that the contractual arrangements under each of these projects are vastly different, and they are conditioned by the difference in national context, sector, and the local laws. This means that each project we have is a new discussion with our legal and procurement colleagues. So consider the following specific project examples. So for Ghana, the objective of the project is to incentivize enrollment, learning, and retention among out-of-school children. And the government of Ghana will contract directly investors and the service providers. And we're using World Bank procurement process for this, as Milena mentioned. bidding for the investor and service provider contracts will be conducted through limited international competitive procurement using a request for bids template for non-consulting services. And we had this back and forth discussion whether to use templates for consulting or non-consulting services. In Uzbekistan, the impact bond was conceived as a performance-based contract between the government and the investors. And the government is selecting the investor under the national procurement law, using national templates for contracts. The investor, in turn, will hire the contractor using private sector practices. And the reason for which we agreed with the government to use national procurement rather than World Bank procurement was because we wanted the government to own the process as much as possible. In the Palestinian territories, the impact bond focuses on employment for youth and women. And the Palestinian Authority, under that project, signed an agreement with a private intermediary, DAI, and DAI in turn entered into a contract with the investors. The investors' private contributions are mobilized and maintained in an SPV and disbursed as the results are achieved. And the contract in that case was drafted based on outside template and negotiated with the investors directly. So these vast differences among all of these three projects meant that the flow of lessons and recommendations from one team to another has been rather limited. And with each project, we found that we were embarking on a new journey. The second point I'd like to make is that the World Bank procurement does not easily lend itself to outcome-based contracting. And with each project, we find ourselves in lengthy talks with our legal and procurement colleagues. And while the World Bank has a lot of experience with results-based financing projects, and one of the three lending instruments at the World Bank, Program for Results, disburses against results, the presence of an investor that provides the upfront risk capital does add complexity to the scheme, to the procurement process, and to contract negotiation. My third point is that, and it's in agreement with the findings of my colleagues that spoke previously, because the legal and procurement processes are generally standard, we do tend to assume that they will run smoother than they actually do. In each of these projects, a lot of time and effort went into determining the right type of contract, and the procurement steps took longer than expected. The fourth point that I'd like to make, and it's something that we did not factor in when designing the projects and discussing with the government the procurement framework, is the degree of liability of public servants for the decisions that they are part of. What do I mean by that? In Uzbekistan, after agreeing with that the investor will be selected through public procurement using national procurement law, there was a time in which the government, after the project has been negotiated, there was a time in which the government suspended the process in order to consider if maybe redesigning the project and using World Bank's procurement rules to select the investor. And a big part of that consideration was the novelty of the approach and the fear of public servants of making a mistake in the procurement process. This was not something trivial and had to be addressed during the project implementation. And after weeks and weeks of discussions and weighing options with the participation of lawyers on both sides, the project has finally advanced using the national procurement rules as originally designed. And the fact that the procurement documents are reviewed by the Center for Complex Expertise of Uzbekistan, which is also a legal requirement, helped with the decision, along with the fact that the World Bank will provide its comments to the procurement package, although the final decision will always remain with the government. And my fifth and last point is that we should also recognize that we are awarding these complex outcome-based financing contracts in social sectors, or as we call them, human development sectors at the World Bank, as opposed to infrastructure sectors. And that oftentimes the contract management skills, OSPAs, in those sectors, and that we should allow for space to explore and learn something that is scarce in our world. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that, as you noticed, each of these impact bonds has a different structure, different contractual relations between the stakeholders, which is not unlike the impact bonds out there. It's not just something that is a feature of the World Bank. But these experiences that we are going through as an institution are important to us because they will serve as a basis for our conversation within the World Bank and the wider community to help standardize the processes to the extent possible. And I'll be happy to speak more about the projects that we are managing here later on. So back to you, Anne.
Thank you very much for those fascinating insights into the World Bank's learning process in this field. We're going to move straight on to GoLab colleagues, Rory and Myra, who are going to talk about some of their work on awarding SIBs in Europe.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Can I just check one thing? Can you online see us? Because I think we missed the camera. Can anyone online tell me if you can see us? No? Yeah. Sorry,
We
Fred,
can't
I
see
think
you.
we had something with the camera.
Just working on that a second.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about that.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I can introduce myself. Even though you can't see me online, you will in just a second. So my name is Maíra. I am from Brazil. I am a lawyer and I was working in Brazil in the São Paulo state government. And then last year, I came here to Oxford to study a Master's of Public Policy. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you, Fred. So hello, everyone. Online, of course, because you can all see me. But as I was saying, I was working in São Paulo's state government. And then last year, I came here to Oxford to do my Master's in Public Policy here at the Blavatnik School of Government, which I am almost at the end now. And I've been working with GoLab as a research assistant for the past few months. So today, Rory and I will talk about our early findings on how different countries in Europe award SIBs. We have been gathering insights and information from different practitioners all around Europe on that topic for a guide that we're putting together for the European Investment Bank. And I am personally very interested on that topic because when I was at the state government back in São Paulo, we were developing a SIB and I saw firsthand how it is important to include and to involve your procurement team early in the process. As Milena and Hilary were saying at the beginning, when you are awarding a social outcome contract, the contract shifts, right? The emphasis of the contract shifts. So you're not looking anymore only at the activities and the inputs, but you're looking at the outcomes. And that can be very challenging to reflect on the contract. So what happened to us in Brazil was that we developed the project, we designed the project, and only after a few months, we decided to go to knock on the door of the procurement team and say, hey, can we write a contract for this? And it was actually much harder because we had to take a step back and we had to include them in the process and we had to take them through a line of thought that we had already been going through for a few months. So we had a delay of a few months in the project due to that. So as Milena said, the process should not be underestimated because it's very important and it should be seen, the awarding process should be seen as strategic when you are awarding a SIB, when you are developing a SIB. So now back to Europe. I think you can all see the slides. Yes, sorry. So in Europe, Currently, we have 145 impact bonds. The UK has launched 88 bonds, impact bonds. The Netherlands has launched 17 impact bonds. Portugal has 16. France has 10. Belgium has 6 impact bonds, although right now only 3 of them are in our data set, but we're working on updating that. Finland has 4 impact bonds. Germany has 3, and then we have a few countries with 1 impact bond, which are Sweden, Switzerland, and Austria. Me and Rary, we've been making the effort to talk to from people from all of this, with people from all of these countries, to really understand how they are awarding the SIBs in different ways. And our first findings are that there is a variety of approaches. So basically, most countries in Europe are using either public procurement procedures or grants to award their SIBs. And in my opinion, there is no right and wrong here. I think that the countries have different challenges and they find different solutions to come through with the project and to develop it. But they do take into account both European regulations and national regulations. So they have different challenges regarding those two aspects and 2 different regulations. And now Rary will tell you more about each of the countries we've been talking to. And sorry, before I forget, if any of you that is here with us or watching us online, if you want to talk to us and share your insights about the awarding of SIBs in Europe, this is still an ongoing work. So please feel free to drop us a line and we'll be very happy to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my name is Rory McDonald. I'm currently working as a Senior Research Associate at the Government Outcomes Lab. Previously, I spent about 15 years managing contracts in the US, different types of government contracts, express contracts, time and materials, and cost reimbursable type contracts. So I'm very cognizant of issues around the contracts. I'm also a procurement nerd. I've got a master's degree in government procurement. I'm a lawyer qualified in New York, so I really care about the procurement processes. But I want to make 3 points briefly. I plan to be brief and can stop me if I'm not. The first point I want to make is around just pick up on this variety idea. So yes, we see that different places award SIBs through contracts, and some places do it as grants. I disagree slightly with the comment that my colleague made, and I think there is a more right way to do it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But in the UK, in the Netherlands, and Belgium, the public procurement system is used for the award of SIBs where the government is an outcome payer. So that's the process for awarding a contract. Whereas in Portugal and France, we see that a grants process is being used. And there are advantages and disadvantages to this. So for example, when doing procurement, a lot of the problems that we've discussed here around the which procurement process should be used, how do we shift to an outcomes focus, definitely exists. There's a program called the Life Chances Fund in the UK, under which about 30 different projects were awarded. The Life Chances Fund actually has an application process at the sort of fund level, and then requires each of the local governments to run its own procurement process. We have 30 different local government procurement processes, and then there's a variety of within those procurement processes. Some of them are sort of more simple, open, everybody bid. Some of them go into more discussions, others sort of direct award. So there's a lot of variety there, and there's a lot of work that has to be done for local government procurement people to understand what's going on here, what should we do, what's the best approach. So that definitely happens at the front end. Contrast that with Portugal. Portugal has made grants under using European social funds. And as anybody who worked with sort of European grants knows that, that there's quite a lot of rules around the money. And so where Portugal, I think, experiences the slowdown is when an invoice shows up for an outcome. It's not a clean, like, here's your invoice, fixed price payment for an outcome. You've also got all the sort of grant requirements under there, like, well, have you spent the money the way you said you would? Are you using which proportion of the money are you using for staff costs? Do you have the receipts for these costs? So, sort of the challenge there is appearing at the end, at the invoicing. So in both these approaches, whether it's a contract or a grant, there are there are likely to be some issues around learning. There are some common issues. Everywhere, I think we're talking about sort of who are the parties, what are the outcome payments, and what documentation is needed around the payments. There's a discussion about the data and the data that needs to be shared during performance. And reporting. There should be a discussion around changes. There should be a discussion around sort of default and termination. Those kind of discussions sort of happen anyway around the contract. But anyway, let me pause there for a second and move to the second point briefly, which is about the parties. Who actually gets this contract differs as well. So in the UK, it's not unusual for there to be a special purpose vehicle and that is set up. The special purpose vehicle might be owned by the investor, and that special purpose vehicle may be the actual contractor with the local government. And then as a subcontractor, you've got the provider of the services. Contrast that with France, where the applicants to the process and the sort of have to be the associations, and that it's the associations that they're sort of working with, and then the associations or the service partners are then getting the loan themselves. France actually has a template contract for that mechanism, and it's got room for all the parties to join the one template contract. You're going to hear from Daniela that actually the UK now has a template contract, and we've refreshed that template contract. And that contract is still set up so that there's the parent payer and a prime awardee. So there's difference in who the parties are, and there's thoughts around that. And actually, something that just particularly said yesterday, might be relevant to which parties do you want to contract with. The third point I want to make briefly is about transparency. So on one hand, there's a lot of people concerned about the scalability of SIBs. Why are there not bigger SIBs? Why are there not more SIBs? How can we do it? On the other hand, when you're asking people, well, can you share the actual contract? Can we share more? Can we see more about the outcomes data? Everybody starts to sort of get, and I think there's a contrast there. And I think, to use a phrase from Belfast, we really got to catch ourselves on. If we really want to see, these things grow and scale, we also have to sort of be ready to share more information about the actual contracts and the outcomes that are being awarded in such a way that we can sort of break through the concern that public officials legitimately have about, well, can I do this? What's the risk? Has this been done before? How has it been done before? And I think templates really help. Discussions like this really help. But people really want to see the documents. People really want to see what are the outcomes that have been actually signed up here. What does this look like? Who are the parties? And so I think there's some work that we can all do to make our niche sector more transparent, and I think that will help. I could go on, but I'll pause, I think.
Yeah, you better not. You'll discover the fierce chair if you do. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for that. And our last but by no means least two speakers are Daniela and Julian, who will, as Rory's already indicated, be talking about the new model contract that they've been working on for the new model outcomes contract, I should say, for SIBs. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And thank you to the Go Lab for hosting this wonderful conference and for inviting me to speak on this panel. So, as Anne said, I'm Daniela James. I'm a lawyer at Freshfields, Brookhouse Derringer. And I'm here sort of representing the POGO contracts working group, which I've been co-hosting with Rory for the past year. And we've been working on developing a new sort of an update to the existing UK contract template. I'm also going to be speaking with Julian online, who's going to talk to you a bit more about some of the changes that we made. So my background is actually as a finance lawyer, and SIBS came across my desk through the misnomer, as I was a junior bonds lawyer about 7 years ago. And since then, I've worked on a fairly significant proportion of the UK SIBS launch to date. In that time, we've really seen the market coalesce around the UK template contract, which was drafted initially, I think, by Bates Wells and is now published by DCMS. And I think that's been really important for the development of the UK market, because it's just led to a huge efficiency of contracting, particularly as commissioners get more and more familiar with the terms of the contract. It's meant that, you know, we've managed to reduce the contracting period down to, I think, possibly even like 2 or 3 months in some cases, which is pretty much unheard of, I think, anywhere else. As Milena said, you know, where you get problems is where you have commissioners thinking, oh, you know, we're going to develop this wonderful project, and then we'll bring in the lawyers at the last minute. They can just make some tweaks to our usual service contract and we'll be good to go. And then you hit a delay of a year. And so, yeah, so having a template has been fantastic for that. However, the template we have in the UK was drafted in 2013, only 3 years after the first SIB was launched. And there have been some very minor updates since then, and we've now had 8 years of contracting and then running these programs. So and there's also been significant changes in law since then. So we thought it was high time for a refresh. Rory and I reached out through the Pogo group, which is hosted by the Go Lab, to find a fantastic group of practitioners, academics and lawyers who've all come together and very generously given their time to this project. I won't go into the changes too much. Julian's going to speak about one of them. I think the key messages are that what we've really tried to do with this refreshed template is to focus on outcomes and also really stress the importance of the partnership that's being developed here. The template is now online, I think, and I think Ian can post a link to it on the Go Labs website. I should stress that it is still a draft, and we are still welcoming any input that interested parties might wish to give. We're also going to be developing another template for delivery partners or providers. As Rory mentioned, the UK model is often to have an SPV holding the contract, which then subcontracts or contracts with another person to actually provide a lot of the program, or even where the contractor is the principal delivery provider, they often subcontract some of the services. So there will be a matching contract coming. I'll pass over now to Julian, who can tell us a bit more about some of the changes we've made.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I'm Julian Blake. I'm a specialist public benefit lawyer at Stone King. I was actually involved in the first conversations with DCMS about the original template with my previous firm. And I said then what I'm pretty much about to say now about how the contracting should work. And I don't think that original template really took those things on board. If I may, I'll just go back, pick up a few points in relation to some of the things that have been said already, which relate very much to my theme. Firstly, yesterday we were talking about procurement, and really I would suggest that social impact bond contracts should not be thought about in relation to procurement. They should be thought about as partnerships. They're three-party partnerships, and you can illustrate that by thinking where does the initiation come from for a SIB? It could come from the innovative provider. It could come from the innovative social finance institution. It could come from the innovative commissioner. Three parties have a perspective on this. It's not one party commissioning another party through a procurement process, a single procurement process. And if you want to put that into procurement language, like I said yesterday, think of the innovation partnership procedure, which is in the procurement rules and is actually about organising partnerships. Also, if we're talking about grants, that introduces another aspect to this, because what that is saying is it's not just about a contract, because there's some need for subsidy here. So you've got to build the subsidy into the process. And if you're building the subsidy into the process, then again, it's not just about procurement, because the subsidy comes in as some part of the partnership arrangement about how the funding works. My big point, and this is what I said originally, and it's also been borne out by the experience of looking at lots of the social impact bond contracts from mainly the provider side, is don't think of it as a commercial contract, a traditional commercial contract. Think of it as a working partnership agreement between three parties trying to achieve the same thing and inputting their various contributions to that partnership. That's how I think it should be seen, and that could deal with a lot of the issues in relation to contracting. Because what's the difference between a social impact bond contract and other types of contract? It's complexity. It's the idea that the deliverables are not easily definable, and they're not even easily accessible or easily measurable. They need to be adaptable, they need to be flexible, as somebody earlier was saying. So it's about complexity, and how do you deal with complexity in contractual terms is the real question. So we've had a very good illustration of the need to consider a well-considered list of risks. That's very obviously true. We've also got to think, and this is a very important point, about a similarly long list of opportunities and how we're going to positively develop the contract, because the risk is about the protective part. The opportunity is about the creative part. We need just as much thought about the creative part as the protective part. And then the point that Daniela was introducing, you need to think about it from three perspectives. It's not the finance institution telling everyone else what to do. It's not the commissioner telling everyone else what to do. The provider's rarely in that direct or real position. It's about each party understanding the role, the function, the capability, the contribution of the other parties. So that is the innovation here. It's saying, before we do anything, we need to look at the list of risks. Yes, everybody would think about that in contractual terms. The list of opportunities, well, we should think about that. The list of perspectives, what does it look like from the perspectives of the other parties here? You've really got to take account of those as well as your own perspective. And that way, you can start dealing with something that's complex with an appropriate approach. What I really wanted to talk about was the practical functioning of social outcome contracts. I'm a lawyer, and lawyers tend to be too technically minded about these things. Joseph Stiglitz in the key address yesterday made the point, really. He said there's a fundamental conflict between social and private concerns. We could say commercial concerns. So there's a fundamental conflict between social and commercial concerns. And then he said the design of the contracts can't deal with it. Now, that is the issue. So what I'm talking about is how you deal with a contractual set of relationships which has three perspectives and interests. It also probably has four parties or more, because we've got the SPV as well. And those three perspectives and those four parties, we're cutting across those social and commercial concerns for each of those parties. So what we're doing is, in principle, we're trying to align those perspectives and interests. So we get a cost-effective social impact proposition, which the social finance institution will invest in, the provider will deliver, the commissioner will pay for with the savings from the successful delivery. That's what we're looking at. That's quite complex from the three perspectives. And what we need, here's the contractual point, we need a contractual framework to fit that complex situation within. And here's the real problem. But too often with contractual thinking, it doesn't extend much beyond traditional commercial contract thinking from one perspective. How do I get protected in this relationship? How do I get my remedies? Right? Now, we've got to go far beyond that if we're going to make these contracts work. For that framework to work, you need the specification of the investment, the service, the impact, the payment. So that's a very particular agreement between the three or four parties. And the very particular agreement needs a very precise reflection of that in the contractual document. It needs to be a working document that reflects all of that and provides for it and facilitates it. So how do you make the framework work? You need the specification to work. The parties need an actual common purpose, a mutual understanding, and effective interaction. So the living part of the contract, the working part of the contract, are the parts of the bespoke specification and the bespoke communication parts. It's not the traditional commercial part. It's very easy to draft a simple commercial contract. And frankly, the original template is rather like a traditional commercial contract without these bespoke parts. So you've got to put all the work into these bespoke parts. For example, an orthodox output specification is very easy to draft. An orthodox interrelation provision in a normal commercial contract is typically limited only to a formal dispute resolution clause. It doesn't say anything else about how the parties interrelate. And here we've got 4 parties to interrelate. So if all 3 parties or 4 parties are focused on the substance, what we're really talking about is that they're dealing with a complex, dynamic, and varying set of scenarios. So the specification needs, as was said earlier, budget flexibility, performance flexibility, and flexibility for all partners with a view to actually realizing the impact, because it's quite unlikely that the original theory of change is going to play out 4 years later and have been perfectly realized. It's going to be, this complexity is going to throw it around all over the place, and the 4 parties need to adapt to that, and they need to adapt to that in a collaborative and cooperative process. So they need to be able to communicate effectively to do that. So they need to be having a continuing discussion to keep the focus on that purpose during the lifetime of the contract. It isn't a matter of the commissioner getting the provider to start off, the funder starting the provider with the startup funding, and then both of those 2 parties sitting back and waiting to see if the impacts are delivered. So we need the 3 perspectives to align, the 3 interests to align. We need 3-way mutual trust. We need trust in the theory of impact. That needs to be strong. We need a 3-way commitment or a 4-way commitment to realizing the impact in reality. Now, here's the real point I'm making. That's a lot of alignment, requiring a lot of communication. And the point about contracts is the bespoke contract drafting of the specification and the communication provisions need to be supportive and facilitative of that alignment and that communication. And so that's what, going back to Daniela's point in introduction, we've got the list of risks, the list of opportunities, the list of perspectives, how these 3 parties really understand each other and really commit to each other to deliver the impact that everybody agrees they're trying to achieve. And still probably, with all of that, we're going to be short of what's really required. And what's really required, I thought, was very appropriately described by Georgia Efremova, who's a policy officer with the Social Impact Investment team at the European Commission. I heard a webinar that she was involved in the other day. She said what's needed is not just an alignment of interests, but an alignment of mindsets. And that's the real point, because the social outcomes contract, it can't assure alignment of mindsets, and very little could assure an alignment of mindset. But that really is what this framework contract, what the specification, what the communication provisions are trying to achieve. We're trying to facilitate and support the idea that the contract, which is what we're talking about in this session, as conceived, as drafted, as utilized, is really all about aligning those mindsets to achieve the intended impact and purpose. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Julian. So we've got about half an hour now for questions, and I can see that there's already some great stuff in the online chat. So we'll pick up on some of those first. I've got a few questions I might throw in, abusing my position. And obviously anybody in the room that wants to ask a question, please wave at me in the usual way. But I want to start with a quite specific challenge that's come in from a couple of people online. So quite early on in the session, a question from Philip Bookman-Mitchell, and also echoed by Ian Marr. To what extent are the risks that everyone is identifying really specific to outcomes-based contracting, to payment by results style of contracting? And to what extent are those risks equally there in sort of more traditional pay for inputs kind of contracting? So I think really trying to push our panel on what is the distinctive feature of this type of contracting that makes these risks such an issue. What would you say is really special about outcomes-based contracting? So, because that's quite a big question, I'm going to let each of our speakers have a go at that, and we'll just go around the panel in the order that they spoke in, and then we'll pick up a few other audience questions after that, and come back again with a little handful of those. So if I can turn first with that question to Milena and Hilary. I don't know who wants to have a go at that from you.
Sure, happy to. Thank you. And then Hilary, you can add to it after. No, it's a good question, and I think it kind of comes back to, let's take a step back. What is really the big difference here? And for me, it all is in the name, right? It's an outcomes contract. So it's the focus on the outcome. What you're really trying to achieve here is a predetermined kind of concrete set of outcomes. And in an outcomes contract, because either the implementer or the investor or both are assuming the risk of actually achieving these outcomes, then the really big difference needs to be in the flexibility that they have to change and adapt the activities in order to achieve these outcomes. And that's an area where it can be very different from traditional grants, for example, where very typically there is a predetermined list of activities that need to be implemented. And these can be quite rigid for providers, for implementers. So in an outcomes contract, I think the big kind of mindset shift needs to be around a much closer kind of definition of outcomes, the ability to review these if needed during the life of the contract or the grant agreement, as was mentioned. But on the other hand, a lot more flexibility in the delivery so that they are well set up to achieve the results. So that would be my very short answer. I don't know, Hilary, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, it's a big question, and I can also add to what Milena said. From the contract procurement side, I would say there are always risks in a contract that you might not achieve what is set out in the contract, but I think it's more for outcomes based, because potentially some things might be out of their control, right? And that and so that's the risk. And a lot of implementers might be wary of that. In a grant situation, if you're giving grants for an outcome, it's even more risky for them, because usually with a grant, at least in the United States, you get paid because it's, it's because of your purpose or your mission. And so you're going to get paid almost no matter what, right? You're doing an activity, you get paid, you're supporting the mission. It's for the benefit of the implementer. And that's a real shift in a grant to say, okay, well, you're not going to get paid unless you achieve this certain outcome. That's a lot of risk for grantees. And we found that at MCC that a lot of implementers are just not willing to take on that risk in that situation.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Can we move on then to our second pair of speakers, Karishma and Miranda? You focused particularly on some of the risk elements. So do you want to try and explain how you see those risk elements as different?
Definitely. Can you still hear me? I've lost audio. Okay, I can't hear you, but I'll just give my 2 cents. Look, definitely, I think some of these risk categories, especially in the areas we defined, can apply to a regular commissioning process, particularly some of those program risks. But I think where it's particularly critical for, I guess, outcome-based contracts, as I think some of you guys have already said, is there's a real spotlight on performance and actually achieving those outcomes, right? So all parties are in there going to really analyze what's happening and how performance is tracking, and having that really collaborative process and dialogue throughout. So I think that's the key difference in making sure that all parties are aligned. And I think, Julian, I think you touched on that brilliantly, and that's been our experience as well, of where certain programs do really well or need to be refined, is when there's that real collaboration and spirit between all parties. And I think what we're trying to get out of the risk framework is actually getting all parties to think about these risks early on, so they don't come up as a surprise. A lot of service providers, it is that mindset shift. So how do you get them to stop thinking maybe from a traditional grant funding process to an outcome-based process, and try to educate on these are the specific risks that you really need to be mindful of in this process. While some of them still will occur and should be considered in a any type of commissioning activity, I think they're just really critical to be at the forefront, particularly in these types of contracts. And I'll just pause and see if Miranda wants to add anything.
Yeah, probably not much else. I just want to echo, Ian Ma's comment in the chat, and Julian also highlighted the importance of that shift in mindset and alignment of mindset. So I think with the outcome-based contracts, the aim is to improve the outcomes by focusing the parties on them, and that there's sort of periodic measuring, reporting, joint governance structures that kind of makes the impact of the risk more transparent and encourages that collaborative conversation about how to improve performance. And that happens throughout, from the setup, early on, and delivery. And I think the idea of the risk framework is that it encourages that conversation from the start, as Karishma said, so that it's sort of a joint process between the parties to think about how to mitigate and manage the risks. And I think that's probably what we see would be a useful spotlight to have on it.
Great, thank you very much. Inge, do you want to respond to this challenge?
Sure. Just like everyone else, when these kind of contracts are designed, when these projects are created, we do a risk framework analysis, and we think of every possible risk that we might encounter during design and supervision, project implementation. And of course, the fact that the bulk of the risk is transferred to the investors and service providers in this type of contracts does bring a different mindset than from the usual impact-based projects that most of the World Bank projects are. What I would like to add to what my colleagues mentioned is that, first of all, we're working in markets with little or no experience with outcome-based contracting. So that in itself is an added risk. And then the question that we are faced more and more lately is, how do you deal with significant changes in context? With all the delays that we're encountering in designing this type of contracts, we find ourselves months and even years later with changing economic context, changing political context, and it's just the pandemic itself that has derailed so much for so many of us. It's hard to predict a lot of these risks, but it is an exercise for all the parties to go through this. And I feel sometimes that in the risk metrics, one should also have a wild card risk, because I find that every time there's something that we have not thought of and we're faced with and having to deal with.
Great, thank you very much. And any thoughts on this question from the European experience?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. Do you want to?
Yes. Well, what I was thinking to say is that, of course, that if you don't, for example, engage your procurement team at a certain moment, you will have setbacks in any kinds of contracts, right? But I feel that in an outcome-based contract, the challenge is even bigger, because you're literally changing sometimes the most important parts of the contracts. And then sometimes your national regulation doesn't allow you to do the shift that you want to do. So you have to be creative. You have to think outside the box. You have to come up with very creative solutions to be able to really take that project through. So that's on those points, I think that awarding an outcome-based contract can be even more challenging than a regular contract. And I think that we can see that in the European countries that we've been talking to.
Yep, I would agree. And I would add something about the more technical and also the relational point. The more technical point was very clear to us, I think, Daniela and the rest of the POGO group, when COVID-19 hits and there's a lockdown, you start to look at your contract and think, okay, well, there's changes here. And it's true that people were doing that for lots of different types of contracts. But one thing we were very aware of was the temporal issue, the time issue. So if I've got an outcome due tomorrow, and you tell me, well, we don't want that outcome anymore. It was last year, maybe, that I put in the work that all this stuff happened. So it's very hard to sort of like turn it off. Contrast that with a regular services contract, where if you said, tomorrow I don't need you to deliver that, that thing that I was going to, the program, the conference, let's cancel the conference. The work around the conference maybe hasn't started, maybe there's some prep, but you didn't do all the outcome work, a year ago. So the temporal thing really matters, and it's hard for everybody to get their head around. If you're thinking about inspection terms or cancellation terms, like all these things that are in a standard contract start to like fall apart because of that temporal issue. But to Julian's point, the point that other people have made about the relationship stuff, I think that's even more important. There are many people, if we're talking about social services in particular here, the public servants who are responsible for social services are very used to working with organizations that deliver social services. And here we're saying, enter a financial partner. And there can be a lot of sort of fear and concern about transferring any power, yes, risk, yes, cost, but also power over to another financial partner. It's like, I want to diverge from sort of the feeling that that Justice Stiglitz had yesterday, and suggest that just because it's a financial partner doesn't mean they're they're evil in some way. People who study organizations know that people don't just conform to type. There are some nonprofits that work really like the evil financial corporations. There are some corporations that work like really wonderful, socially motivated organizations. And so that sort of really matters, figuring out what type of partner am I working with here to overcome that sort of that transfer of power and risk and cost and so on that's happening. Those would be my thoughts.
Fantastic, thank you. Finally, just handing over to Daniela and Julian to see if they've got any thoughts on this issue. I think we already know that Julian thinks that these contracts are distinctive, but I won't disenfranchise you by not letting you answer the question. Daniela, you go first.
Yes, I think I would echo everything that's gone before, and particularly what Rory said. I think really focusing on how are the risks associated with outcomes contracts different to a service or grant contract. I think it's really important to look at that temporal point. So, as Rory says, you do the work, you get paid later. We all know that what that means is that you are, assuming you achieve the outcomes, we all know that what that means is that you're transferring implementation risk, right? But what other risks are you shifting the balance on? So, what we found out in COVID was force majeure. That's a massive risk that you are effectively transferring to the provider or investor as a result of this temporal shift of paying for outcomes rather than services. And I think you actually have to look at that throughout the contract, and you have to think about each part of the contract in that context in order to really shift from a service contract or a grant agreement to an outcomes contract. And I completely agree with all of the stuff about the partnership stuff, but that's been very well said before, and Julian's a better place to say that than me.
Okay, thank you. So I've got two answers to this question, and it depends whether we agree with Joseph Stiglitz that there's a fundamental conflict between social and commercial concerns. If there is, we're talking about commercial concerns and the risks of the commercial risks, and they're enhanced for each party. The investor has taken on more risk by funding things in advance. The provider's taken on more risks by taking on more complex delivery obligations. The commissioner's taken on more risks by putting in place a more complicated arrangement than would be normally undertaken. So those are the commercial risks. They're quite obvious ones. But if we, as we all should want, Joseph Stiglitz to be wrong and say there isn't a fundamental conflict and the social and commercial concerns to work together, and we therefore are assuming that there is a commitment by all three parties to purpose and impact, then I would answer it differently. I would say each party is taking on appropriate risks, proper risks, because they're doing their jobs properly. The investor is genuinely supporting the project by offering their finance in the terms they are. The provider is genuinely focused on what will really be beneficial by taking on complex delivery obligations. And the commissioner is avoiding the risk aversion that's so typical of procurement and those sorts of processes by really actively putting in place arrangements that might genuinely have impact and have beneficial effects. So that point is, yes, each three-party is assuming more risks in commercial terms, but that's totally appropriate if those three parties are trying to achieve the outcomes that are the intended outcomes of a social outcomes contract.
Great, thank you very much. I want to pick up on a couple of slightly more specific questions that came through in the chat about particular types of problem that might arise in these contracts. So one focused on issues around price competition and the problem of bidders coming in at too low a price and a price at which they can't deliver. And the other focused on issues around transparency and the sort of more traditional concerns that investors and bidders might have around commercial confidentiality and how you reconcile that with moves towards greater transparency and openness. And I thought those were both great questions focusing on kind of more particular problems. So I wonder if our panelists have any thoughts on those issues. I'm turning again to you, sticking with the order, which means you don't get so much thinking time, but that's all right. I'll
turn this on first. Yeah, I'll talk about the first point on the pricing, because I think that's something I've definitely seen as a big challenge in outcomes contract. It's what's called usually winner's curse. So it's the risk of providers or investors bidding at a price that is too low for the outcomes that they're committing to delivering, and that's particularly critical when there is a lot of focus in the procurement process that is put on the cost effectiveness. So either when there is too high a weight that's put on the financial proposal, or in general when there is too much focus on the cost. And I've definitely seen that happen. I think it's a big challenge because we've got to recognize that we're still at the beginning of these type of approaches, and so a lot of providers are not yet used to delivering outcomes. They're used to delivering activities. And so they really face a challenge when they're being asked to bid on a price per outcome. And very often they can either overestimate their capacity to achieve the result or underestimate the cost that will be needed. And actually what I found interesting when I was working on procurement processes, and for example, in the program in Morocco that we've talked about with Hillary, is that sometimes the organizations that have the greatest experience and the ones that really have collected data, or that in a way are the best place to deliver the outcomes, are the ones that are going to be coming with a higher price. And the ones that are, on the other hand, less experienced, don't have the data, so are higher risk organizations to achieve these outcomes, will tend to overestimate their capacity to achieve the outcomes and underestimate the cost. And so they're going to be at a higher risk of that winner's curse. And ultimately, that's something we've got to be really conscious of, because I think if we end up selecting these organizations, then it can lead to a lot of challenges for all parties, right? Obviously, from these organizations' point of view, they're more likely not to achieve the outcomes and not to get paid, and that can lead to pretty tragic consequences for some of them. But also for the commissioner, at the end of the day, this is, you're entering into these programs because you want to achieve the outcomes, right? And so it's in no one's interest to award contracts at a price that is too low when you risk facing these challenges. So I think something that you've got to be really conscious of as you enter these procurement processes. When we were working on our best practice guides, we were thinking of actually recommending not putting too much weight in the initial stages when it's the first time that you're doing this type of program in a new context, not to put too much weight on the cost effectiveness and to put more emphasis on quality of the technical proposal, but even more strongly around the evidence of impact that has been achieved, right? And other kind of capacity to collect data, capacity to adapt the program during the intervention. What is the organizational strength to actually achieve these outcomes?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Hilary, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Milena said it very well, but I will add that there are ways to structure the procurement to get around this issue of the winner's curse and always going for the lowest price. As Milena said, you can put a lot more weighting or scoring on the technical part, on the organizational capacity, and the quality of the organization rather than just on price, which is the way that traditional procurement is done. One major challenge that I've had as a practitioner, I would say, is that it's very difficult to price outcomes, and it's very difficult to evaluate that as well. It will take a lot more thinking, I think, and work to understand how to do this well. And that is definitely a major challenge that needs to be thought through. I know at MCC we've had a lot of difficulties in trying to allocate costs to outcomes, and I know that also implementers have that challenge. And just to say one other way that in our procurement regulations to also address this is that for each procurement we have to do a justification of price reasonableness, and that includes the price being too high or too low. So there is a detailed analysis that goes into all of these procurement processes, and if the price is too low, then the procurement that person can be disqualified from the procurement because it's been determined that they can't do the work at that price. So that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you very much indeed. Karishma and Miranda, any thoughts on either price or transparency issues from your experience in New South Wales?
Sure. I'd like to just echo, I think, a lot of the comments already coming through, particularly about winners curse. When we go to market and in terms of our evaluation of proposals that come through, we definitely apply much more of a balanced view where kind of value creation, I suppose, isn't like the largest component at all. And obviously the impact of the program as well as organizational capability, capacity, the networks that they actually have with the local market definitely has a really high weight that we put in that initial stage. We've actually given feedback to providers that were not successful, that in some cases we thought that the price that they put forward was too low, and that could actually be something that gave us a bit of concern of how well they understood the delivery of their service. So I definitely think it's not or in these contexts, it's not purely driven by price or value decision. I would just like to add a little bit of a, I guess, more practical on the ground experience of how we sometimes try to get all parties on board, but also work on these issues is after a proposal might be successful or shortlisted, we typically go through what we call a joint development phase. And that really is where we work on really refining the program, the assumptions. And when we talk about partnerships, this is where I guess the crux of building those strong collaborative relationships actually start from. And so this is, I guess, this whole process, we're talking about design here, but in a sense, it's the procurement. We've already gone to market and we're really working with the provider to nut out a lot of these things. And that also includes like, what is that price for an outcome that as a commissioner, you're willing to pay on, but as a provider, you know that they understand the risk that's involved as well. And typically in our contracts to try to ensure there's flexibility, we have, as you'd expect, kind of annual reviews, but also quarterly, what we call joint working groups, where all parties come back together on a principle that you maintain a very transparent, cooperative approach. And I think during these changing contexts that were mentioned, that has been a critical for us to kind of ensure we can monitor how a service provider is going, but also work with them on any issues and provide flexibility if needed. Miranda, please add if there's anything I missed.
No, I think that really sums up Aussie's experience. Just one other example that might give a bit of context around our approach is that as it's an outcome-based contract and we're not paying for a specific service, which I think one of the comments in the chat also mentioned, that means that there's sort of that flexibility to adapt the service. And if there's some underspend, sometimes there's a discussion around how can the participants in the program be better supported through other means, or how can this funding be repurposed. And I think also, during COVID, there was that discussion around what's the right way to support people, and that discussion is not always about price, I think. Yep. In terms of transparency, I think that if there are external investors, there's that reporting to them through the social impact bond. And we also make available on our website tools and templates to try to increase the capacity across the sector. And also all the impact investments Aussie has have evaluations done, which include more holistic measurement of outcomes, not just the one for payment purposes. And that's to try to give a broader idea of different stakeholders' experiences and the benefits of the program. And those are all published on our website as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're really excited to be here today, is to learn from other people and to share. And I think that it's really great to be part of the conversation where we can learn from other people's experiences and hopefully then improve the whole process for the sector.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We are getting a little tight for time now, but I do want to give each of our panelists an opportunity just to comment briefly on that pair of questions around price and transparency. Inge, any thoughts from you briefly?
Yeah, just to maybe add to things that have already been said. One is that going back to time lapsed, we find that the prices that have been assessed went through rigorous analysis at the beginning, and then you have a delay of 2 years or so. You find yourself in these situations where revisions would have to be made. So there's some consideration there, and it has to be built in and have a really strong partnership in which this understanding of flexibility is built into the contract. On transparency, I think for us it's pretty straightforward when it comes to World Bank contracts and the agreements that we sign with governments. These are public. It gets more less straightforward in situations where we do not own those contracts. There's a private party, or it's a contract between parties like the government and the investor, and the World Bank is not party to that. I think it would deserve a separate panel and discussion as to how we bring those to transparency, and how do we get access to the broader public, not just us, because we might know as being part of the conversation about the details, but the broader public about how the contracts have been negotiated and under what terms.
Thank you, Inge. I think there are a number of issues here that we could do another panel on. Any thoughts from you two on either of these?
Just briefly, I agree with what the panelists have said, and the focus has got to be, yes, something about price, but also these non-price factors are really important. Really bad eyesight, but I did catch a discussion about cost-benefit analysis. I'm not sure that's what we're talking about. Cost-benefit analysis is where you're pricing benefits and pricing costs and weighing them up, and that's an economist tool to decide, should we do this at all? What we're talking about is really, when I'm looking at different bids or deciding, do I enter this contract, price is one thing, whether it's prices for benefits, prices for costs, but these other non-price factors, like, do you know how to share data? What type of organized, what are your mission statement, or tell us more about your capacity to do these things. These are things that, yes, we score, but we don't try and price those things. And then giving people the ability to weigh up those sort of pricing, especially the non-price factors, I think are really, really important.
Fantastic, thank you. And just finally to Daniela and Julian, I wondered in particular if you've got any thoughts from the model contract around the transparency issue?
Yes, Thank you. Yeah, I won't talk about the price comparisons. It's not something I get involved in. So Rory and I, in our new template, have tried to deal with this transparency issue by making it the default position that the contract is able to be shared, and that the parties are able to share a number of other bits of data associated with the contract, including price per outcome, and the outcomes that are actually achieved, which I think is the kind of key information that this market really needs in order to be able to develop. Obviously, it's completely up to the parties to decide not to share that information, but we think that it's helpful to have a kind of framework and an assumption that that sort of information will be shared in the future.
Thank you very much. Julian, anything to add?
Yes, on price, again, why are we talking about a procurement and lowest price? We're talking about a partnership when we need to take account of all the factors, including the resourcing, including the perspectives of all parties. So we need to, in that dialogue, in that partnership dialogue, decide what the realistic price is and how the relationship works on that basis. So it shouldn't be a problem. It's a problem if it's only coming from one perspective. The provider's perspective is, if I'm going to deliver this complex contract, I need a realistic price to be able to do it. And on transparency, I agree totally with Daniela. We're talking about arrangements aimed at purpose and impact. The default position should therefore be it's collaborative, it's transparent, as opposed to being commercially protected.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. So I need to draw this session to a close now. And to thank our in-person audience and our audience online. I'm really sorry to those of you whose questions I didn't get to. There's been a really lively chat going on, which has been a joy to see. And of course, a massive thank you to our wonderful panel for sharing their various experiences from around the world. One of the great things about working in this area is the extent to which we can learn from each other, and people working in quite different settings have got a lot of common ground that they can find. And I've certainly really enjoyed the session. I hope you have too. For those of us who are in the room, there's a break now. For those of you who are online and those of you who are here too, the next session is a big picture session at 11:15 our time, entitled Art and Science, Making Sense of the Global Evidence on Outcomes-Based Contracting Approaches, which looks fantastic. So those of you who are here, there's coffee. Those of you who are at home, make your own coffee, and stick around for some networking, and we'll see you later for the big picture session. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Thank you.